what the startup ecosystem actually is about. But generally, the visualization here is to communicate also where that innovation traditionally has been happening more. So through bigger companies and public sector organizations who have had bigger resources in past, they have been the ones really being able to develop those innovations, where specifically the reason has been that it has been so expensive, resource intensive in the past. But with all of the technology developments and innovations on top of innovations, with business models, with open source softwares, with software code, free distribution, Creative Commons, general cost of technology, new platforms, new channels, new networks, the ability for anyone to innovate has gone down, and it continues to go down. More technologies, more advanced technologies being more freely available to more and more people keeps feeding this open innovation side, which most effectively happens in the form of startups and in startup ecosystems. So this shows really the kind of the weight of the activities between different actors. So the old world used to be very simple and linear. There wasn't really multi-dimensional networks and instant connectivity to anything or instant distribution. There used to be no way of individuals to communicate to the whole world as to be able to reach such audiences. It used to be closed, expensive, less creative, dependency on hosts and gatekeepers. And ideas and inventions and research by big companies was that there was also more need and more use for things like patents and trying to protect those big investments that these big organizations had to put a lot of resources behind to protect their investments, to get enough time to get the products into the markets and so forth. But because of the accelerating pace of innovation and the cost, many of these things that come from past are less and less relevant methods today. Some of them still are, but also the way, for example, how patents are relevant, the business game around that has changed significantly from their original purpose, and it's mainly something that the big companies can play with those, because also protecting and executing those patents are getting more and more expensive, whereas the innovation and protections through customer base and network effects are getting more achievable. So with this, we know that old models are already working at its best. So it's really, really hard to improve the old models without completely changing them. And that's what is happening in the market. And specifically, these old models are extremely difficult to improve from outside. So basically, we can't go, if we want to, as a government or public sector or bottom-up actors, which we can't just walk into companies and universities and say, hey, you should change your ways, you should do this and this differently. But that can happen on the open environment where things are more dynamic and more independent. So the old world really has less and less innovation impact achieved by outsider strategies and methods. And the newer world, and this of course varies a lot depending on what countries or what cities you go between, where they are with this kind of older world methods and approaches compared to the newer world things already in place, because these transitions are measured in decades, not in individual years. So a 10 years transition between these two worlds is still relatively short time. and there's big differences in these worlds around innovation in different countries. So the new world is non-linear, it's global, it's very networked, it's fast-paced. There's free, cheap technology, platforms, channels available for tiny companies to new companies to even individual people. And innovation via startups is fast, it's flexible, people are highly driven, highly motivated, highly committed. Because of the lack of resources they have, in counterwards, they are extremely cost effective, and they are more and more supported by private and public parties. So there's a constant support, and there's also a constant demand for more and more innovation invited through these methods of new startups. And this makes the whole innovation process more exposed to the markets. It's more open. Basically, as you can imagine in big corporations, how they do innovations in a research lab and behind secret doors and NDAs and all of that. Whereas startups, they keep running around in the markets, they pitch in events, they share their knowledge through blogs, they communicate openly a lot what they're doing. Not necessarily from all aspects of their business, but many aspects of their business. And in return, they get a lot of feedback, ideas, people are able to follow. So the whole process, how the innovation actually happens in the marketplace, is more open to markets as well. And a lot of big companies are working together and buying most potential startups. So the newer the big companies are, so the more modern they are, the more digital they are, likes of Facebooks and Googles and Amazons and so forth. So the more they work with startups, and I think we can all kind of understand how Apple and App Store works with developers. That very similar analogy applies to how smart big companies are working with startups. They see that startups can deliver a lot of new value and a lot of new innovations also for their customers. And once the innovations get validated and mature enough, they are interested in buying these companies. And that is one typical way, of course, for startup companies to get exits and return of investments for them, for their own risks and efforts, as well as potential investors who have joined them as well. So it really is outsourced innovation for bigger companies. And new companies, because of the side products, new companies are also the biggest job creators, because it's also logical that you need more people around to push and grow and validate that innovation. But even more clear is that once the innovation is validated and there is actually new value created, that new value is genuinely something that both require and can sustain those jobs. So basically, there's a need, and at the same time, there is value being created that converts to resources to actually be able to sustain those jobs and develop them further. Whereas if we think on bigger companies and organizations, that iterative development, while that may increase new value, typically it is only able to sustain value. So basically there's an expectation that there is a constant innovation, because if there is none, there is no ability to also sustain your business anymore into today's market. So there is no situation where you could just stay with your existing products and not need to do iterative innovation. But that iterative innovation, it starts to be to the point where that's not enough anymore. And at the same time, there's other innovations that come to organizations that helps make their operations more efficient, and that actually reduces jobs, because now with these new technologies and methods, organizations are able to deliver the same value or iterative innovation with less resources. So that is the challenge between where the jobs are created and where they are not created. And of course, these are not as black and white. There's always a lot of variety in this, but this point here is to communicate the bigger picture, the mega trends, and their rationale and their impacts.